This is a special meeting of the Board of Education to discuss issues as to whether additional propositions for this year's budget should be proposed. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Turning to item 3 on the agenda is discussion matters. Again, any propositions that any members believe should be added to the May 19th budget vote. Does anyone have anything to start with? I will. Probably the reason why everyone's here. James, the tiles floor in the high school, asbestos tiles. Is there a recommendation from the Facilities Committee concerning that?
The recommendation for the tiles in the high school is embedded in the facilities report that was presented to the board probably a month and a half, 2 months ago now. I understand that that report is going to be reviewed by a board committee, and I know we have not yet done so. So I think what you may be referring to are the tiles that were discussed at our last meeting that would have to be combined with the turf field to make it aidable. Is that? And so you're wondering how much we added to that?
Yes.
I believe we added 200,000.
Okay. What does that project entail? I know that it's detailed in the report, but if you can give us a general overview.
Well, what it entails is we have a high school that, as you know, was built in, I think, the 60s. And much of the floor tile is still the small asbestos tile. They, in many areas, begin to crack and sometimes lift up because of the dryness. And Mr. Grillo's here, but the dryness of the glue that had been affixed to hold them down. As they are asbestos, one of our goals has been to continually work at replacing asbestos tiles throughout the entire high school, ultimately, until there are no more in the rooms. It was actually included in the 2008 fund, was it, James, as well?
In the March proposal. That was
Correct, and that was defeated. And so when we came back with the bond that the community supported, we had reduced in scope that particular phase. So I believe that is why we see it again in the next facilities report, because it's being brought back as something that was never able to be accomplished.
And these are the tiles that are original to the building?
Yes.
And what's the total cost and what's the scope of the project?
the total amount of tile at the high school is about 906,000, and we had discussed is 200,000.
And what's the scope of that work, the 200,000?
John, it's about 10,000 per classroom.
Yeah, a little bit less, depending on the size of the rooms that we're going to abate. It'll probably be around 15 rooms, something to that effect. Using a general purpose classroom of about 770 to 800 square feet.
And when would that work be done?
That work would be slated for the summer of 2016.
Do any board members have any questions concerning that? Scrito?
Is there a timetable when this stuff has to be removed, Mr. Grillo, as far as asbestos goes? Is it,
Because it's asbestos and the guys are in the white Tyvek suits and the masks, even though if you had this floor tile in your house, you as a homeowner could pick it up, put it in the garbage and throw it out. In the public sector, we can't do that, so we're really limited to when kids aren't in the building. So we try to push that for only in the summer in case there is some kind of, you have to do air monitoring, and in case the air monitoring comes back with a positive reading, you have to do a re-cleaning. It's very difficult to do it on a weekend, so usually we limit it
But
to
the
that.
question, is there any time frame at which all of it has to be removed?
in other words,
By law?
if I understand correctly, Mrs. Grillo, I believe it's not friable unless
Correct.
it's all broken up
Correct.
in the air. So it's not a problem that's there, but we're doing it for,
In advance, yes.
And
Correct.
and I think the difference, it's generally not a problem in our buildings. The high school tiles are, we've been experiencing some issues with. For some reason, in the middle school, they're glued down and we're not getting them up. But in the high school, they seem, as Ms. Chris had mentioned, they seem to be popping up a bit. Whether that's it's the glue that's drying out, it's over 50 years old. So we are seeing tiles that are popping and need to be dressed as needed at the high school.
Is there any benefit or drawback to including that type of repair in the budget rather than as a separate proposition? A financial drawback?
No, there's not a financial drawback. We have decided to do that.
Is there a non-financial drawback? Or any drawback whatsoever?
No, just that the one major project we included, as you know, was the boiler replacement here at Whippoorwill, because that is something that could become an emergency type situation. But there's no drawback per se.
And you mentioned the boiler replacement. That was in the facilities report as well, right? Correct. And what was if you could summarize briefly what the issue was with that and the cost to repair or replace or whatever the facilities committee recommended?
Well, the issue with it is that the boilers are original to this building. There are two of them. One is still working at full capacity, and it's my understanding, correct, Mr. Grillo, that the other one is working at about half capacity. And our fear is if that one goes down, we have preschool children in the building, we have daycare children in the building, and all the people who work here in Whippoorwill. And we might find ourselves in a situation where it's difficult to provide heat.
Is there a contingency if that does happen and we've yet to or have not replaced the boilers?
If a boiler goes down, the board would have to declare it an emergency, and if it is in the winter, usually what they would do, the insurance company would bring in literally a temporary boiler. A boiler on wheels, they'd bring it up as close as they could to the building, and they would pump their lines until we get the boiler replaced. The other issue with the boilers is they're H.B. Smith boilers. They got out of the market of making the large, they call them like pork chops, looks like the letter U upside down. They're not making those anymore, so I know it's a little bit more difficult for facilities to find those. They kind of got to look here and there. It's not just as readily available as they used to be several years ago.
And what would be the time frame for doing that work if that got to go ahead?
That too would be done in the summer because inside the boiler is friable asbestos. There's fire brick and millboard and sand. That can only get done during the summer. And if we did that, we really would want to isolate that wing and kind of work things out with any programs that are going on in the summer. That would have to be done in the summer.
And would that project be aidable?
That project is not aidable.
Can I clarify something about the high school
Sure.
tile? I think that you said we would do that in the summer as well. But a classroom is a project, or is it not, that we could do on a holiday recess period?
We could stagger it. We could do some, a couple over April, a couple over February, those kind of things. You could do that. The difficulty is cleaning out the rooms, getting it prepped.
But there's more flexibility with that than there would be with the
A lot more.
timetable.
A lot more.
And what was the cost of that, I'm sorry, total for the boiler work?
For two boilers, it was 700 and something. For the one boiler, it was the 450,000.
And does the administration have a recommendation as to how and or when that work should be financed and or done?
Yes, our recommendation was that the boiler work should be done, placed in the budget, under the capital work in the budget, which would have us doing it this summer, correct, John? Next summer after.
Yes.
Summer of 16.
And that's an important note that these projects are a year away. So if there was an authorization this spring, we couldn't begin the work until July of 2016.
And there's no way to get that project aidable? There's no project to link it to or anything like that?
The reason it's not aidable is because this is not an operating school building at this current time. To make it aidable, we would need to open this building as a public school, or at least a portion of this building as a public school.
And does the administration have a recommendation concerning the asbestos tile work, when that should be done and how it should be financed?
No, not a specific recommendation. Our recommendation, my recommendation, continues to be to take a comprehensive look at the facilities report that was presented, because rather than take item by item, I think the most prudent thing to do with that report is to review it, to decide which projects the board feels we should move forward with. And once we know which projects in total in the district we should be moving forward with, we can then assign different funding sources to them, including the possibilities of a bond, the operating budget, the use of fund balance, etc., whatever it may be. So a specific recommendation just for the floor tiles, no. The reason we brought them up in our last discussion is that it would be something that could be linked to turf fields, if that's the way the board is interested in proceeding, that would make the fields aidable for us. That is really the only reason it was a project that was just selected for that purpose. And it's a doable project over time.
Any questions concerning this thus far from any board members? Mr. Grillo, at our last meeting, Mr. Scarito had asked you to take a look at the lead content, or the possible lead content in our track, that material that's used. Were you able to do that?
That's EPDM, and what we did is we were able to get from our environmental consultant just a generic MSDS sheet on it, and really the only health concerns on EPDM is that if you're handling it, meaning if you're installing it, it could cause skin irritation or eye irritation or anything like that. There was nothing listing any kind of potential carcinogens or any of that nature.
Okay, now I know when we started discussing the turf fields at our last meeting, one of the products we were looking at was this EPDM, and I know it was not recommended for turf fields. Why is that?
According to Field Turf, who's one of the big players in the synthetic turf market, they used the EPDM as an infill in Europe, and then they had several product failures. They didn't come out and tell me that they wouldn't warranty their product with the EPDM, but they kind of pushing towards staying away from the EPDM product as an infill. Now the EPDM that's on the track is really tied together with almost like a glue or an adhesive, and it goes down almost like you would put asphalt in a large spreader, where this would be more granule fill. It would look no different based on the color as the crumb rubber, the SBR rubber, anything like that.
Are you aware of any environmental concerns, carcinogens, what have you, with EPDM?
No.
Yeah, Mr. Scarito?
On these swing steps we had asked about too, Mr. Grillo, is that EPDM as well, sir?
That's all EPDM as well. I mean, the only other thing you could do is if you had the environmental testing lab physically take a piece of that sample from that track or up playground and test it specifically for that. But just looking on a generic set, there's nothing that I can find on any NSDS sheet, and the environmental people couldn't find anything as well either, other than, like I said, eye irritation, skin irritation, that kind of stuff.
Any other issues that any board members would like to explore as far as proposition matters? I will, at our last meeting, we briefly discussed turf fields and the possibility of installing turf fields. I know that we asked administration to look into it a little bit. I think we asked you as well, Mr. Grillo, architect, to look into it. Could you update us where we are in that?
You want me to pull it up?
Although I don't recall that specifically, what we have done in preparation for tonight is we do have a graphic which was requested of what the facilities committee recommended, and placed in the report. And then we do have a slide that shows the various funding sources that are possible. There are 4 options, one of which is not really a very good option, but there are 4 options, and that might be a place for the board to begin discussions.
Great.
So as you can see on the overhead, the lower right, the oval, that is the existing stadium, if you will, and the synthetic turf field there has been estimated by Mr. Grillo to be $1.38 million. And then, of course, the board would have to discuss the option for the alternative infill, which you were starting to discuss before, another $125,000. In the upper left is the second of the turf fields to be discussed, and we're calling that the north fields, if you will. Certainly an area where, as you know, it gets plenty of use, and sometimes we have difficulty in terms of rotating and the grass growing. That was estimated in the facilities report at $944,000, with, again, $125,000 for optional fill. If we use the Nike grind, I believe. Therefore, the total cost, if we added the vinyl asbestos tile to make the projects aidable, of the stadium would be $1.705 million, and the north field would be $1.269 million.
Okay, and when we say aidable, could you explain a little bit what that means?
Sure. If we link either of the fields to a project inside the high school that is aidable, we'll receive back from the state education department 55% of approved costs over 15 years.
And is there any approved costs? Kind of worries me a little bit. What does that mean?
Generally, our projects, what percent, John, have been approved costs?
Well, this entire project would be fully eligible for building aid.
So,
Yeah.
There's no question that if the board chose to go in this direction, 55% of the money would be returned to the district over 15 years. Any questions from any board members before we move to the funding options, just concerning this right now? We move to the, Mr. Scrito.
Without the turf, people talk about the grass and stuff like that. Really for long-term wear and tear, is the grass even natural to keep up the amount of times that we use those fields? Because I know we had to rotate them last time, Joe, with the things, we couldn't use them for a while.
Well, yes, we've always had to deal with rotating the fields, and of course, some of it is dependent upon weather conditions. If we have a rainy season, you have a snowy season, things are sometimes difficult. But in terms of the upkeep of a grass field versus a turf field, I don't think there's any discernible difference, is there, John?
In terms of maintenance costs, or?
No.
No, there's really no discernible difference.
It is an important note, though. You correct me if I'm wrong, but the stadium field is only used for games at this point. It's not used for practice because of the wear and tear on the field. So if there was the synthetic turf placed in the stadium, that changes the terms. And now that field is open for much more use than the limited use that we allow right now.
So is the idea that the increased use of the turf field would rehabilitate our grass fields, make them more apt to recovery?
The idea is that it would help.
I'm sure we all have more specific questions, but can we look at the funding options?
We listed 4 different funding options, really, there are only 3. Option 1, it is possible to issue long-term debt for this project, and you can do that with a separate proposition 45 days in advance. Option 2, this could be included in a larger project, although that would not be able to be done tonight, but if we were to put together a $20 million or so project, this could be one of those sub-projects in that. Option 3, we can use funds that we expect to be remaining at the end of this year, and we can use that for options 3 and 4. And the only difference is the voter approval. In one scenario, the voter approval is a separate proposition. It's a standalone, only a vote on turf. However, it's completely permissible as well to include this in our already existing transfer to capital line in the budget, which will be voted on May 19. Just a note about the funds, when I say the fund balance remaining at the end of the year. As we talk each and every year, we take in more revenue than expected, and we hopefully underspend the budget each and every year. This year we had 3 big items that we have spoken to the board about in the past. Number 1, we expect to receive about $500,000 more pilots from the town of Smith, the town of Islip, than we have in any year in the past, generally receiving around $500,000, and they told us to expect close to $1 million this current year, so that's additional funds. Also, we were very fortunate that our insurance company, our very responsive insurance company, covered half of the roof replacement, the emergency roof replacement at Hauppauge High School, despite the fact that the roof was beyond its warranty. So we're receiving another $40,000 from the insurance company this year as well, which was not expected, because in August, before we knew the insurance company was going to act, we did a budget revision and we took appropriate fund balance to pay for the whole project. So now we're getting $450,000 back. Also, based on comptroller's recommendations, we are lowering the appropriated fund balance for next year by $750,000. And again, we're lowering what we're appropriating next year, but we also lowered some of what we were budgeting for next year, because remember, when we appropriate fund balance, we need to have that fund balance left at the end of the year as well to put towards the next year. So by lowering $750,000, that makes that available now too. You add those 3 items up all together, that's $1.7 million in itself. This is a one-time revenue source. It's available this year. We don't expect it to be available next year. So it's prudent to spend on one-time costs. It's not something really that you can hire staff with, or I would suggest carrying over for operational expenses, because again, the plan is these were unexpected incomes, so we don't expect to see those again next year.
So just looking at the 4 options. Option 1, well, I'll ask a direct question. Any of these options, would any of them result in us being able to do the fields without any associated tax increase on the community?
Options 3 and 4
Correct.
would do that.
So options 3 and 4, to be clear, we could do with cash on hand, so to speak, without having to marshal any additional money from the community?
And understand that normally that fund balance would be applied to some of your other funds that we have, e-block funds and things like that, and an existing capital reserve fund. So it's not as if it's money that just existed. It's money that we counted on to do some of those things as well. The board would be making a decision to apply it to a turf field versus those other options.
Mr. Kraft, you had your hand up first.
Superintendent just named it. Part of my question was, if we don't use that money at all, where does the money go? You know, some of it can be used for other projects, and if we don't touch that money, where does it end up again?
It goes into the various reserve funds that we have. This is generally our recommendation to the board.
We transfer.
Sabrina?
If I read the paper correctly, they've now going to $1.6 billion. Has the budget been settled yet, or am I wrong? Did I read
You're
correctly?
talking about school aid?
Yes.
While we have an indication of what our increase in school aid might be, James and I discussed this at length this afternoon. We don't feel that it's appropriate to be part of this discussion right now because we still do not know when we're going to get that aid. It could be tied to the APPR, which may be not approved. There may be a piece of the APPR we have to negotiate with the teachers by November.
It's not a done deal yet.
It's not a done deal. If we can't negotiate something, then the governor is saying, you're not getting your money. So for us to count on that money in any way, I think would be foolish right now.
But these funding options did not consider that money anyway, right?
Correct.
Any further questions from the board concerning the funding options? Mr. Kraft?
If we did take that $1.7 million and, if we chose option 3, we had a separate proposition and say the public did vote that we should do this, and the boiler goes, do we have money anywhere else to use that in emergency to repair a boiler quickly?
Well, they're actually separate. The boiler has been embedded in the budget proposal, so that if the board decides to go forward with the funds remaining at the end of the year, we'd still recommend going forward with the boiler as a part of the budget to do that project. So they're not connected, and we would act on them separately. Right now, the forecast that we sent home, and this number will go up and down, but we're looking in between $2.5 and $2.7 million remaining at the end of the year. So if there was funding for the one field at 1.7, that would obviously leave funds available that could be put in a reserve as well.
But to be clear, the board has not yet acted to approve the superintendent's recommended budget, which is now yours because I handed it to you in February. If the board makes the decision to move forward and take in total what the administration presented to the board, then the repair for the boilers here is in that budget already. So it would be taken care of. And as John said, it would be voted on in May, but not done until the following summer. The difference in option 3 and 4, which I think you all understand, is to then either have turf fields as a standalone proposition, which could pass or fail. There's also a nuance, not that I would recommend it, that you could make, if that's proposition 2, you could make it dependent upon the passage of proposition 1, which is the budget. You can do that, that is an option for you, or you can keep them separate. And then the other option 4 is to just embed it in the budget. And then if the budget is approved, the turf fields are approved.
So just looking at the 4 options, the 3 and 4 in particular, whether we include it in the budget or we include it as a separate proposition, there is no associated tax increase with that. Is that accurate?
Correct, given our current fund balance projections.
So if it's included in the budget, that wouldn't change
Correct, the tax cap.
tax cap.
Yes.
In our current budget, we're looking at less than 0.5% over last year, is that?
0.32% right now with of 0.9.
The budget increase is almost 1%. The tax levy is expected to increase about $256,000, which is about, as the superintendent said, 0.32%.
Now, from a financial standpoint, is there any advantage or disadvantage to including fields in the budget rather than as a separate proposition to be voted on?
Is there an advantage to including it in the budget?
An advantage or a disadvantage financially? That's the question.
I suppose if it's included in the budget, are you asking me if between options 3 and 4, you're not including a bond with that question?
I'm asking you strictly as to option 4 right now. If the board decided to forego the board decided they wanted to have fields, and they decided to forego a separate proposition and just include it in the budget. You've already said that would not raise the budget, correct?
Correct, but I believe if you're really looking at that issue, it's the sense of the community that you must have, because if you sense that the community is in favor of the turf fields, then embedding it in the budget, I'm worried about the school district budget passing naturally. You would, without issue, be able to include it in the budget. But if there's a concern that we don't have the pulse of the total community, and the community is not in favor of turf fields overall, then you risk having your budget go down by choosing option 4.
I understand that, that was going to be my follow-up question, but my initial question was just from a financial point of view, it does not matter.
3 or 4 does not matter.
Dr. Kraft?
Do you have any recommendation for the night of the budget vote? If we decide to come out with a bond that night anyway regarding the other projects that were recommended with the Facilities Committee, and then we have a separate proposition, say we choose option 3 for the fields, then we have the budget vote, then we have Board of Ed elections. Is it too much going on in 1/8, or is there any recommendation on that?
Yes, and I think we mentioned it with the facilities report. We would not recommend putting a bond before the community in May, although you must know that there is some discussion up at the state about legislating the fact that bond votes would have to be on the day of the budget votes. That's being discussed. You probably read that in the papers. But we would recommend, first of all, there needs to be a careful review of the rest of the report. And as I said before, determination of funding sources and/or projects to be done or not done. We would recommend considering putting that, if you want to do a bond, before the community in the fall sometime, probably in the October kind of time frame, not putting it up against a budget.
Dr. Kraft?
Just a quick follow-up to that. If we do it in the fall, when would that work be completed? I know there's a delay, and then if we say that a bond got passed in the fall of the 15th.
Generally, when we do a bond like that, because the scope of the work is so extensive, we sit down with the architect and we literally plan out within a 3-year time frame, for instance, which projects are done at which year, because you can't possibly do them all at once. So we plan it out.
But-
Last time we used 3 years, correct?
3 years, yeah.
3 years.
But I believe you talked about a delay too with that the first project that can be done. Isn't there a good year anyway that before the first project gets even underway when you do a bond?
One of the things we would look at is the way the state is working right now. The architects are at about a 10-week lead time in terms of review. The engineers, they just posted today, are at 32 weeks. Now, there is money in the budget. There's apparently $1 million in the budget to be given towards facilities planning to bring back up staffing.
In the state budget.
Yes. Carl Furnow, I think when he started, he had 24 employees in his department. They're now down to 14. So if someone retires, they just don't replace it. So we would have to look at all of the projects and then break them up and assume that anything that's an engineering project, mechanical, plumbing, electrical, you're not going to have that done in 16. That would get done in the summer of 17 because of the long lead item. We would sit down, as the superintendent had said, and look at these projects. Okay, if it's masonry or roofing, something that's just an architectural review, we would be able to get some of those done in the summer of 2016. You just have to now start to separate things as you send them to the state.
Mr. Scrito?
You mentioned, Mrs. Chris, that option 3 could also be tied to the budget. What is the benefit in that? I'm sorry, I'm confused.
I'm not sure there would be a benefit to that. I will tell you that in the bond that was defeated back in '08, well, yes, it was. There was a proposition for the bond work, and then there was a separate proposition for the turf field. The turf field could only pass if the first proposition passed.
But it isn't the benefit of tying the two together that if you wouldn't want the budget to fail, but the fields to pass.
Correct.
That would be- Any further questions? Does the administration have a recommendation as to option 3 or 4 if the board decides to go forward with turf fields?
Yes, I just have to reiterate that my true recommendation is that we take the time to sit down and do the review of the whole facilities report. I really believe that that needs to be done to make determinations. But you specifically asked me the question between option 3 and option 4, if the board decides to move forward with it. And if the board decides to move forward with it, my recommendation would be option 3. And I think you probably understand why. I would not want to place the rest of the instructional program in any kind of jeopardy should the community not, the majority of the community not want to support the fields.
Where are other schools on Long Island on this turf field issue? The majority of them have it, do they not have it? Are they exploring it? Do we know?
I would have to say a majority of the school districts either have it or are in the planning phases of it. You know, I would say it's way more than 50%. You know, there are districts, they're turfing their softball fields, their baseball fields, so yeah.
Have you been involved in those projects?
Yeah, I put in, I guess, close to 30 across the island.
Any unforeseen issues or anything that you hadn't planned for with any of those projects?
The only thing maybe is when you're going to do a little excavation, when if you have to put in some new dry wells, maybe a little bit of clay or anything like that. But really, no, I mean, it's pretty straightforward.
My question is more worried about cost overruns. Is that built into the number that you gave us here?
Yeah, what you normally do, because it's publicly funded, so we can't go out and we need $10 more to fix this or that. When you put together a capital project, you have hard costs and then you have your soft costs. And in there is a contingency, a construction contingency, just in case there is an unforeseen condition. And then obviously if that money is not used, we just don't spend it, we don't borrow it, it goes back to a reserve or you know, that kind of thing. So it's built into every one of those facilities projects has a safety net per se.
And as far as time frame, longevity of these things, have any districts had them in for more than 10 years?
I just replaced my first field in Cold Spring Harbor, round 2. It was down for 10 years, and it was one of the old generations of turf fields. Now they found the one after that, that's about in the mid-90s, the slip film, is easily lasting 10 years. So if you say, if you want to look at that analogy, you say 8 is going to give you 10, 10 might give you 12. I haven't seen one, there's not, Pat Med, I know replaced theirs as well. I haven't seen a turf field on Long Island that's down 12 years. But they're definitely lasting their warranty, without a doubt.
Were you involved at all in the Comac field?
I was not, no, not that one, no.
I think theirs has been down for 11, I think.
Yeah.
Do we know of any issues at all?
I haven't heard, I can find out. I'm in that district, so I can find out if there's any. I haven't heard of any.
And I think that we know that there are no issues in comment.
And I think Smithtown's had for a while now as well, right?
Smithtown's is not nearly as long as Comac. I just also replaced some Hassett's. That was down, but that extended the life as well. That was beyond the 8 years. This will be 10 years on it.
And I guess anecdotally, have you heard any health concerns or anything? I mean, you know what the issues are, what people's concerns are. Have you heard anything from any of the districts on Long Island concerning any of those issues, whether it be lead exposure or MRSA or anything else?
I've not heard of any health risks, and I haven't seen anything that's directly related to turf fields on any of those. I know there's been studies done in Fort Washington, and I think there might have been done one in another district in Suffolk County. They brought an independent testing lab in, and they did air sampling and ingestion and inhalation, and didn't really find anything other than some of the reports that we've seen from the EPA and DEC and some of these other universities.
Any questions from the board? Gary?
John, of the, you said about 50 fields, roughly?
Myself?
Okay. About how many of those were, composition-wise, how many of those are chrome rubber percentage-wise?
Every one of them.
Every one. So,
That's one of the products we've talked about is the Nike grind, which we've looked at as being a safe alternative to the chrome rubber. Do you have any information concerning that, Nike grind?
Other than what we talked about at the last board meeting, it's a fairly new product, like a lot of these other alternatives to the chrome rubber. I think it's been down for about 3 years. Like I said, obviously Oregon, they started in Oregon. I have a couple in New Mexico. I think they just put one in either in Westchester or in Queens with the Nike grind product. You know, they say it's a little cooler than the chrome rubber because you can get that, 10 to 15 to 20% worth of the different colors in the sneakers. Maybe that brings it down a little bit. I'd have to see that to believe that. I haven't heard anything bad, but again, in terms of does it last 8 years, that we don't know because it's really only going, it's on year 3.
In essence, it's just pulverized sneakers, right?
Pulverized rubber sneakers, correct.
Mr. Kyler?
What is the length of the warranty, and what does that include?
They're just starting 8 years on the warranty. It covers basically the GMAX test, which basically every year you have to take it almost looks like a small tube like this, and you basically shoot a projectile into the ground, and the force that it hits onto the chrome rubber and the sand has to be below 200. And you have to do that on a yearly basis. So once that gets above 200, then the insurance issues come in and all of that comes into play. So that goes on a yearly basis. All of the manufacturers also recommend that, which I've also recommended, that you hire whoever installs the field. They either charge $5,000 or $6,000 a year, and they'll maintain your field. They'll groom it 4 or 5 times a year if there's any repairs, because some of the lines, not all the lines come from the factory installed. What happens is the majority of it is green, and then they literally take sheep shears and they shear out the lines and they glue them down. So I've seen where a piece of the turf pops up a little bit, it has to get glued down. That's part of their warranty. They'll cover all of that stuff, as opposed to charging you if you're not using their maintenance plan.
Have you seen any vandalism on the field that have been done?
I've seen a couple of districts where they've set fire, sure.
And that's not covered under warranty, obviously.
That is not covered under warranty, no.
James, could you bring back up the map slide? The north field there, I guess the lacrosse field, it doesn't have a border on it like the football field does. Is that a concern at all? Is there something you put there?
What I would recommend on the north field is at the north end and the south end, put a 10 or a 12-foot high fence at both ends, and then maybe wrap it up another 10 or 15 feet. And then down the sides would be a 4-foot high fence. So people could stand along the side and watch the game either from one side or the other. It'll also allow access for handicap accessibility, bleachers, those kind of things. And it'll also prevent any kind of vandalism from people driving on the fields.
Is that included in the estimate?
That's all, yeah, that's all in there.
Mr. Scrito?
Yeah, that was going to be my question. So it does need a perimeter around it, or you're just saying the fence to protect it? See, I'm trying to figure out what holds it in there.
What happens is there's a nailer. So basically, it goes over the top, and it's a concrete nailer, and it nails in. But if you run grass to synthetic turf,
Right.
I mean, there's a chance that as you're cutting the natural grass, you start to cut the edge of the synthetic turf. You would either you could even just go as thin as just a 6-foot wide exposed concrete curb that separates the grass from the turf. But I'm thinking of in the winter, there's snow, kids get on the field, they drive across, they're going to drive. There's one thing to damage regular grass, but to start driving over the synthetic turf. So usually you fence them in. I've done a couple of fields where they're not inside the stadium field, and we've just done a 4-foot high fence around them.
Mr. Scrito?
I know Mr. Butler's here as well as Mr. Tasman. Are those used for games as well, or no? The north field? Or is that only used, they only use the stadium? So don't we use soccer things over there?
Yes.
Is that fence going to impede on anything, Joe?
No, I think that the turf field would be the game field,
Okay.
Just out of curiosity, our league, our sports league, our division, I guess, would we be the first with turf, or the other ones have it already, or is it mixed?
Every sport is a little bit different as far as the, you know, what teams are in which league. I mean, I can think of teams that we played recently. Huntington has the turf. ISO just put in turf. We play them in a number of things. You know, both the Hauppauge Hills, Bellport, and Bellport has a different situation where it's a separate field. It's not their stadium field. So I think depending on what sport, you could take it a little bit out of time, and we could compile a list of who
But
does it.
basically, it's mixed because not every high school has a turf field.
No, you're right. Not every, not every.
So the answer is yes. It depends
Some
on the
do, some
sport,
don't, right.
some, yeah.
Excuse me,
We're going to open it up to,
I just want to add some information with regard to what you were just asking.
please just hang on, okay? We're going to open it up to the community in a minute. Any further questions from the board concerning this? Mr. Kiley?
Varsity now plays on the main field, is that correct? Or does JV also play on that? Football, soccer,
Football, varsity, and JV both play.
they both play that. I was just trying to see, will there be other sports and other, like either JV sports, be able to play on that field that doesn't play on that field now? Being that it is turf?
Yeah, because basically, if I'm correct, your JV schedule alternates with your varsity. So you play the same school, and you're either home or away. If the varsity's home, the JV's away, and then it flips. So the field should be accessible, correct?
Right.
Mr. Butler?
Yeah, to go in with that is a lot of times when the boys' team is home, the girls' team is away. So I guess that's, you know, there's certain logistics that you have to work out with that. But to say, you know, obviously, if there was a boys' soccer game varsity that was home and the girls' varsity was away, I mean, you probably, yeah, and that's something that can be worked out. But you would think that the varsity would probably have precedence over that. But if it's not being used, obviously, it could be used without damaging the field, you know.
Yeah, well, right now, it's not, they're not going to use it because of the grass, trying to grow grass, or just keeping it in decent condition. If we have the turf fields, we'll probably, how much more games can we play on these fields? Would you say? Would it increase by 25%, 50%?
It'd be hard to put a percentage on it, but the field is ready to be used every day. And by using it every day, it wouldn't be in any worse condition the next day than it was the day you played on it the day before, which is not the case.
Any further questions from the board? Any questions from administration for anyone that's here? Okay. I would like to, before we have a vote, if we want to have a vote, open it up to the community for comments and or questions while we have everyone here. I will ask that if you want to speak, please just step up to the podium and you will be recognized and heard. I will give preference to the gentleman that interrupted.
Sorry for interrupting.
That's all right, Pedro. Welcome.
Hi. So my name is Pedro Contreras. I am a Hauppauge resident for 10 years. One thing I want to mention, so we're part of, obviously, Section 11 in terms of sports. In our groupings, there are 45 school districts. Of that, 29 of them have turf fields at one of their schools currently. There are a number more, probably 4 or 5 more, that while they may not have it at their school, they do have access to one either at a town park or a county park within their school district. So it is more than obviously 50%. My question was with regard to what we were talking about before with regard to the cost of the football field being turfed was what?
It's, we're calling that the stadium.
Stadium.
Okay, it's 1.38, but then you have to add to it, Nike Grind is what we go with, another 125,000.
Okay, so let's just say 1.4, right? And now the north field, we're talking about
1.5.
1.5, okay. And then the north field? 1.1. So 2.6? 2.6, of which we're talking that if we tie this into the project in there, 55% of that would be coming back to the school district.
Over 15 years.
Over 15 years?
Yes.
Correct. So that brings the 2.6 to 1.2?
Well, in order to do what you just said, it's not 2.6, you have to add another 400,000, or whatever the board decides, another couple hundred thousand, but yes.
Correct. All right, so that brings it to 3 million, if we add that, of which 55% of it would come back. So it would bring it to roughly around 1.4? Roughly 1.4, of which $500,000, we were saying before, in terms of money that was left over from the current budget, right, could be allocated towards this.
No, the cost of it, the fund balance, we were talking about the fund balance that we have projected currently could cover the cost of the stadium field.
No, I understand that. I'm saying that currently, though, you're projecting that you're going to have a surplus of $500,000.
Correct,
Okay.
but we would not recommend using that as well, because we don't know what's going to happen between March 31st and when we close out our books. So in terms of being prudent, in terms of making recommendations, I think that's why we went with the 1.7 that would be more comfortable with.
I understand that, assuming that your projections are accurate.
I think to just clarify that the plan we're putting forward would have no additional tax burden on the community. We would fund it through monies remaining at the end of the year.
Right, of which, I'm just saying that we're talking about 1.4 million net dollars over a 15-year period.
But we make the full outlay, so if we do the stadium field, we make the full outlay of 1.7 million, that would be covered completely by money left over at the end of the year. Then we would receive back building aid over 15 years, and that would be used to help balance those years' budgets as they come.
Right, okay. So it just sounded like to me that the majority of this project, between the 500,000 that you project to have over, the 440 that you're also projecting to come back in terms of the insurance, covers most of this project. Right? Okay, so without having any effect on classroom size, having no effect on the budget or anything like that, it sounds like the majority of this project could be funded within within our example right here.
This project would be funded in its entirety by money left over at the end of this year, would not affect next year's budget.
Okay.
Or anything that's funding next year's budget.
Okay. And that's the funding for both.
Yeah, James, you're not talking about both fields. We're talking about the stadium field
Stadium.
only. When
You're
we
talking
use
about
that
the
stadium. Yes, that's what
Okay.
we're talking about. I think you're trying to say we may have enough money to do both.
Right. Well, at least it sounded like to me, just based on the numbers that you guys were discussing here earlier, with regard to the $3 million project, of
Right.
which 55% comes back.
But
The 55% will come back over here, so you have to make the initial outlay. So you need to have all the cash for the 100% of the project up front, and then you get paid back over 15 years.
Right. So even if you floated the bond over the 15-year period, it would be funded.
I
By
don't
the
know if I
money's
would
coming back.
Recommend that, because there's interest costs and stuff associated with that.
Right.
This is cash on hand.
Okay.
So there is no additional cost. If we were to float long-term debt, there would be an additional cost in terms, we can't carry that money left over at the end of this year to
Right.
pay off that bond over 10 or 15 years. So really, I couldn't recommend that, because I would feel there would be some kind of.
Well, there is the option to do the stadium with cash on hand and float a bond or finance a second or third field some other way. You don't have to do them the same funding source.
correct, and you could discuss that at the facilities report.
Anything further?
I did have one other thing. You know, I know there's been obviously a large discussion with regard to the turf fields, and I wanted to kind of just put out a couple of maybe some, or squash some misinformation that it's probably been out there. One of them was whether or not the turf fields would benefit, that it would only benefit a small portion of the, population here in Hauppauge. And just based on some information that I gathered, the school district has approximately 3,700, 3,800 students in the district. All right, am I right with that number?
Close to 4,000.
Close to 4,000, okay. Currently, and I am the president of Hauppauge Soccer. So with soccer, lacrosse, and football, there are approximately 1,500 kids who are playing those sports, okay? There are 60 varsity, JV, and middle school teams that we currently have, which have well over 1,000 kids playing those sports, okay? Now, obviously, I understand that many of our kids here do play multiple sports, so I am kind of double counting here a little bit with regard to the number. But it is not a small portion of kids that are going to benefit from this here, okay? And I also kind of want to point out, and this is something that the school district had to do a couple of years ago because of safety concerns. You know, the fields at the middle school had to be shut down because there was a rash of injuries that occurred as we were playing some school sports there, where there were kids who were breaking their ankle, torn ACL, and these were on non-contact injuries. They weren't injuries where there were collisions, there were violent collisions. They were just simply running either up or down the field, and because of the field conditions, those injuries occurred. There's so much going on here in Hauppauge in terms of that, our fields never really get a chance to recover. I don't see that problem changing. Okay, there are a lot of sports going on here, a lot of kids playing sport, and I think that's a wonderful thing. And I would really hate to take that away from our kids. I think doing a project like this is only going to help to alleviate some of the pressure on our grass fields here and give them an opportunity to recover. Because of the use that we have here, these fields never get a chance to recover, okay? Which is why, for example, at the football field here, why we only play games there is because trying to keep it maintained so that when these other school districts come into here to play, there's at least a decent field to be able to kick a game off, okay? So I just kind of wanted to mention that. The other part of this, and again, just kind of information that's going out there, I know some people who are against a project like this is because of maybe they don't have kids in the school district, but we also have to concern ourselves with, the value of the property, our properties here in the school district. If someone is looking to move into this community, okay, in this area, okay, and if I were one coming into here, I'm going to look at the Comac School District, the Smithtown School District, and the Hauppauge School District. If I'm going to look at those three school districts, we're pretty comparable in terms of our academic achievements with those other school districts. But where we lack tremendously is in our facilities compared to those other school districts. So someone looking in this area to move into them, and if they were looking at graduation rates, if they were looking at the academic achievements, and if they were looking at the facilities provided for their kids, we are currently lacking behind, and part of it is the conditions of our fields. So, again, obviously, I'm for this project, and I hope that the board would strongly consider putting this through. All right, thank you.
Any other further questions or comments from the community?
Kristen Reesfield. There are a lot of other fields in the district, at the elementary schools, at the middle schools. Do you have any sense for how many kids would play on turf fields versus how many would still be playing on the grass fields?
I couldn't give you a number of how many kids you're playing on this turf field, but I can tell you that there'd be more opportunities for the youth sports to practice on this field because right now they can't. We don't allow our youth sports teams to practice on the stadium field because of the usage.
Okay. Are there options that the Facilities Committee is considering that might improve the quality of all of the fields?
The Facilities Committee, as you mentioned, has looked at this, and based on the deliberations, the recommendation was to install a field. They actually recommended 2 synthetic turf fields. We have irrigation on most of our fields at the high school, and we're continuing to expand that. We have irrigation at the middle school. We even have irrigation at Forestburg at this point in time. But grass is difficult to grow, especially when you're playing sports like lacrosse on that. I often have many conversations with Mr. Tasman. when he's athletic director in August and explaining that grass just doesn't grow very well in August to build up that turf we need for football and stuff in September. So we have taken many steps. We are not allowed to use pesticides. We are not allowed to use your traditional fertilizers, etc. By state law. So it is very difficult. We try to use different products, different organic products and such, and try to irrigate these fields as much as possible. But because of the use, we just can't keep up. So last year, what we started with Mr. Tasman's help is we started closing fields. And we close a field to allow time to rehabilitate. And what that has done is...
Yeah, but are there any recommendations for Bretton Woods or
No.
the Pines or the middle school for irrigation?
Well, middle school has some irrigation. The high school has, well, in the back.
Yeah.
The high school has irrigation, Forest Brook has irrigation, and Soccer Club has made a generous offer discussing about maybe expanding that irrigation at Forest Brook. Bretton Woods and Pines currently do not.
I think the hope is, and the thought is that the use of the turf fields will enable those other fields to improve, because you'll have less play on the grass fields, more play on the turf field.
And that makes perfect sense, but has there been any study done to really understand how much that would be affected?
John, are you aware?
There hasn't been I mean, it all, you know, you could take a field out of commission for 6 months and the first rainy Sunday or Saturday, you're not going to cancel your games, you're going to play, and then 6 months worth of rest, it's going to be destroyed in a weekend. You know, it's just, you have to have a firm policy. If it's raining out or if it just rained, you can't play on the grass unless you have a very good, and it's expensive, a subsurface drainage system, sand injection slits that drains the water a lot faster. But you're talking about a very expensive system for a for a natural grass field.
Those same concerns exist with turf fields?
24/7 on a turf field.
One last question. So I know you mentioned the Facilities Committee is looking at a number of different projects. Are there projects that could potentially go undone or postponed for a number of years in order to pay for this?
Certainly, the technical answer to that is any project that's in the recommendations could be substituted. I don't believe, and I have to do a review of it, I don't believe we have many projects that have as high a cost associated with them as this. Correct, James? Well, roofs, yes, but we have, right, and we have a capital reserve set up for that we can use.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments from the community?
Hi, Jessica Klessa. I am the varsity girls soccer coach. I am also a Hauppauge soccer league coach. I am a co-director of HYO girls lacrosse. So just a few different points from the few different hats that I wear. As the varsity girls soccer coach, I've actually moved my home field a few times. Our varsity soccer home field is at the top of the middle school. But when it rains, it drains very poorly, and we've had a lot of issues with mud, with sliding. So I've made the stadium field for the large majority of my season my home field, which by no means is so much better, but I found that the conditions are a little bit better over there. In terms of turf, the majority, probably about half of our proposed league for next year does have turf or access to turf, which means we would be playing on turf. Every championship game now, Suffolk County Championships and Long Island Championships are played on turf as well. And not that I think turf is the greatest thing, and it's not about the hype. I had the privilege of playing on probably one of the most pristine grass fields on Long Island when I went to Adelphi. Stiles Field, which has since been torn up for a turf field. And if I had the choice to play on a field like that or play on turf, I would choose a field like that. But we don't have that option here. Our fields are worn down. They don't get the rest. And I know that because I'm out there with my soccer team. I'm out there with the lacrosse team. We're out there all the time. And had it not snowed last weekend, we would have had our girls lacrosse teams playing in games that have yet to practice outside. We have not been allowed to use the practice fields because the only lacrosse fields right now are at the high school, and we have not been able to get on those fields until this week. And if it did not snow, those teams would have played in a game. And some of those young girls have never played girls lacrosse before. So we would have been throwing them into a game with absolutely no practice. So I see it from all different aspects. As a community member, as a homeowner, I definitely see the value in offering that, especially for people looking into our community. As a coach of the players, who go to these other schools and they see these fields, or being asked to play on a field, the game is completely different. Playing on turf versus playing on grass, it's asking them to play a completely different game. It's much quicker. It's usually much bigger than our grass fields, so there's some concerns there. So to be able to practice on a field like that on a regular basis, because our teams do compete for championships, so to be able to now have that advantage. As part of the girls lacrosse program, I'm the middle school coach. A varsity coach couldn't be here today. She's had a lot of time missed in preparation for her varsity lacrosse season because they didn't want to go out and tear up the fields all the time. And the schools that she's opposing that have turf have been outside practicing, having regular practices, not practices cut short or having to be modified because of their field. So, I do hope the board does, seriously consider this because I really do feel it would be a strong advantage for our community. Thank you.
Ms. Klesson,
Yes.
do you believe that our kids are at a competitive disadvantage compared to the other kids that they're playing based upon our fields, the condition that they're in?
For when we play on turf, absolutely. Because like I said, it's a completely different game. It's a lot faster. So to go from playing on grass to then have to turn around to compete in that game, it's very different when you're playing against a team who that's their practice every single day. They play at that speed. They play on within those conditions. I do believe it gives them an advantage.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Messina?
Thank you. First of all, I have to disagree with the gentleman to my left who just spoke about the difference in facilities. Comac has 6 courts at their tennis facility. We have 7. They do have a turf field. There's no question about the fact that it's time that we do get turf fields. There's no question in my mind, and I think that as a community, and like the gentleman did say, that we would move forward. Our district, whether you can say people look at Smithtown, people look at Comac, people look at Hauppauge, Kings Park, when they ultimately look at the entire picture, they pick Hauppauge. It's one of the most desirable places to move on the island, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm prejudiced, of course. I just have a couple of questions. The north field, is that exactly where it would sit, or is that... It seems like the softball field is closer to that field, and I'm just wondering about the fence, because they do play softball games and do play lacrosse. Is that going to be a 12-foot fence along that side? That's on the west side.
That'll be 4 foot. If a girl hits a ball there, she shouldn't be in high school, she should be in
No,
some
I'm
kind
not
of
talking,
pro.
what I'm talking about is that exact dimensions on our field? Because it seems like the softball field, the outfield, left field, is a lot closer.
You can actually see on the aerial where the indication of the softball outfield is. You guys use a temporary fence?
a real fence.
Yeah, and is that it? That's it?
Can you point to it, James?
You have a pointer?
The white,
Yeah.
it just seems like it's off with the parking lot.
That's the softball field. This is not exact. I mean, once we survey it and we lay it out, I mean, it could go 5 feet to the right or to the left. I mean,
But
this is
you're
more-
saying basically it's going to be plenty away, far
Plenty
away.
away.
The other field, the stadium field, what are they going to put around that?
That's some of the things that we could talk about. Obviously, the pro to the stadium field, if we're only looking at one, is you have the bleachers, you have the press box, you have the stadium lights. The drawback inside this field is we're locked into the existing dimensions. It's very narrow. It's probably one of the most narrow side to side. It's only about 205 feet wide. So when you go with 180 feet sideline on your girls lacrosse field or a soccer field, you have about 8, if we were going to net the whole thing, it's 7 feet and then only about 5 or 5.5 feet from the netting to the inside edge of the track. So we'd have to work out some type of configuration, maybe we put the nets at the 2 ends, or we do them in sections where we've done them before, where during games you take them down and you just leave the 2 ends up all year, all spring. Usually teams don't leave the nets up in the fall. They always take them down and they bring them up in the spring. So maybe the two ends and a little bit up on the side, and then the two sidelines come down, and then they go back up for, you know.
I know Bill Mader was concerned about the track, and I've coached track. Obviously, if they only have a 4-foot fence going around, you're not going to be able to run track.
This would be netting. This would be the
Right.
safety
The
net.
12-foot,
It'd be the 10-foot high, it's 10-foot high safety net.
that's during the season. Football, you wouldn't need it.
No, I wouldn't recommend I haven't seen any district leave it up during the fall. Usually they take it all down, they store it fall and winter, and then they put it up in the beginning of the spring.
Okay, my last question is, are there any fields that they have that give you a little bit more warranty? I know we talked about are there fields, turf fields that are maybe a little more expensive, but you're going to get 15 years or no?
Nobody's got 15. They all started to go to 10. Field turf and sprint turf are now going into the 10-year range, but nobody's at 15.
Okay. All right, well, my last comment is I definitely agree. I know at the last board meeting, people had the impression that I was against turf fields. That's wrong. I'm not against turf fields. I think that it would be an asset to our programs, soccer and lacrosse, to be able to play on them. And I think it's something that we should definitely consider in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Pacino.
How you doing? I'm Dan Valenza. I work over at St. Joseph's College, and we have a turf girls lacrosse and soccer field. When I tell you, it's probably the easiest thing to maintain. We take pristine care of it. When you talk about netting, like you said, Mr. Messina, we have netting that goes from north to south, and it covers just the end zones. So you take the poles in, you drop them down, and the girls can run track, whatever they need to do. And we get rid of it that way. The other question I have is both fields, are they going to be lined for every sport? Because if you're going to do that field over there, why not make it a football field? Why not make it a girls lacrosse, boys lacrosse? You know, if you're going to do it, you might as well take the opportunity to make it useful for every sport.
John, how have other schools handled that, the lining of the fields?
We've done it both ways. The most I've ever put is 5 sets of lines on a field. I know we don't have field lines. We've done up to 5 lines.
We don't have field hockey.
Yeah, I know, that's what I said. It does get a little confusing, especially because the 50-yard line is white, and you start to do lines side to side, so then, you know, I've heard sort of some kids, like especially the youth league, on the boys lacrosse, they're always going off sides because it's not a blue line down the middle, because usually blue is boys lacrosse. In the football, it does get a little confusing. I would envision this, if we did this, as just soccer, boys and girls lacrosse, and maybe not football, but that, you know, completely up to you guys.
Thank you.
One more question. Who's actually going to do this? What company? Landtech?
First, what you would have to do is, if there was a successful vote, we would have to then design the project, submit it to the state education department, and then, because it's a public entity, we'd have to go out for public bid, and it would be the lowest responsible bid. Because we're not a private sector, like a college, we can't pick and choose who we want. We have to publicly bid it.
Just so everybody knows, after that last big snowstorm, the company that we have Landtech that does the maintenance on that field. They pushed that snow off the field, and we had probably 6-foot-high snowbanks on the side. But the girls lacrosse team was out there playing the next day. That's how easy it is.
Thank you.
Bill Waters, just a couple of quick questions. This north field, the price, does that include lights? Okay, so basically then it's really not useful. If we're going to we should put it on the stadium, correct, so we have lights? And what would be the time period that we would be allowed to have the lights on till?
We have not even discussed having lights on that field.
The north
It
field.
was designed, yeah, not the stadium field, but the other field. The design of it was, as we said, primarily thinking of soccer and lacrosse, and while you can't guarantee daylight hours necessarily, in the spring sport, although lacrosse is, I'm not sure it's spring anymore, it's always so cold, but your time frame wouldn't necessitate lights necessarily for the games that the high school kids play. You know, I don't know how extensively community would use it and be interested in lights, but we haven't discussed that. And in terms of the lights, Joe, on our football field, Do we have a time where we turn them off? I don't believe we do. I think if we have an evening game, like our homecoming, the lights are on until the event is done.
Right, but the idea is to utilize the turf more so that the grass is utilized less. If it's gonna be dark out at 5, aren't we sort of defeating the purpose when we could use, we could probably go another 4 hours till 9 o'clock at night on a turf, letting the youth use it at that time?
The youth leagues, potentially. As far as the school district goes, we don't tend to go that late into the
Correct.
afternoon.
All right, so then, if to get the maximum usage for the youth, we would typically put the field in the stadium, I would guess, correct, since we have access to the lights? And is there any plan to put lights up on the north field if you were to do it?
Not as currently designed.
And if you were to use the north field for your school teams, you would have to include a scoreboard and stuff like that there also, correct?
Not necessarily.
You can't have a high school games being played with a scoreboard that you hang off the side of the table, correct? That would look that would defeat the purpose of putting a new field in, so,
I think the idea is that our primary field would be the stadium.
okay, cool.
That's the idea.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas?
Good evening. Carl Thomas. I'm not going to repeat what everyone had gone through, but I'm currently the director of Hauppauge Youth Lacrosse, and seeing that north field go in, the stadium field, I could speak for most of the members of the Hauppauge Youth Lacrosse program that we would welcome those types of fields to be brought into the program for us to utilize at the youth level. Our program grows every year. We gain about 15, 20 kids a year. We're probably coming up on around 170 next year. Our goal is to hit about 200, but we utilize those fields on a regular basis. We've been delayed like everybody else. We're 2 weeks behind schedule as far as getting our youth out and playing, and we've utilized indoor time with turf. And we do face a lot of opposition in our leagues that have turf, and we've moved our games to turf, similar to how the high school had to do with some of the varsity games. So I strongly support it. I'm a lifelong resident of Hauppauge. I graduated in 1984. I played on these fields, and we had nicknames for some of them. Down by the varsity field over here was called the Dust Bowl. When you ran down there. So I've been through all this. It's refreshing to me. I'm a taxpayer. I'm a volunteer fireman. I sit on the board of fire commissioners. I'm active in the community with the sports. My son graduates this year. My daughter is a sophomore. I have another son in middle school. I would love to see my daughter or my youngest son eventually play on one of these turf fields and have that as a recreation purpose in Hauppauge. I think it just says something about Hauppauge sports. We put competitive athletes out there. We have kids that go to Division I schools. We have kids going to Division II, Division III. We produce good athletes here. Parents are into sports in this community, and it's always been that way. And I think having the turf fields, we're going to see more of that. And just the one last thing, I talked to Mr. Tasman earlier before the meeting, the injury part of it. I've coached dozens of teams in soccer and football and basketball is not outside, but lacrosse. And seeing some of these boys that play JV or varsity sustain an injury on the field because they're running behind the goal and they step onto a molehill and pop their ankle and they're out for 6 games because they messed their ankle up because of the field condition. Now, I know the groundskeepers don't go around and chase wildlife like Caddyshack does or anything like that, but it's tough to manage a grass field versus a turf field. And I think what the gentleman mentioned about the maintenance on these fields, from what I've seen and what I've heard, I think it's a win-win. You're not out there mowing the lawn, you're not running irrigation to it, and I just think it's a benefit to the community. And I think, just like I said, speaking for Hauppauge Lacrosse and a lot of the community people that couldn't be here tonight, we would strongly support something like this. So I'm happy to see it, and I commend the board for bringing this plan up to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments from the community?
Hi, how are you? I'm
Hello.
Diana Satanino. I'm a resident and a coach for one of the Hauppauge U12. And I come from Comac, and the fields there are beautiful. And I'm wondering what happened to the fields here. It's an embarrassment as a parent and a coach to have a team come and play on our fields. So I welcome this, But at the same time, when we're playing soccer, it's embarrassing. So what is your answer to the other fields? Are you going to put drainage in? Are you going to put sprinkler systems in? What is your answer to that? Are you thinking about making that whole side, north side, turf instead of doing both? That would make more sense because you could have 3 teams at once playing. You have lacrosse, you're going to have a lacrosse game, a soccer game, and maybe 2 soccer games or 2 lacrosse games or whatever. And so you should really, really consider making that whole area turf with lights so you can use it up until maybe 10, 11 o'clock. So as a parent, I'm embarrassed, and I'm probably talking for the whole community. Embarrassing. So how would you feel if your child was playing on our fields? Then you go to another field, and their fields are beautiful. Do you guys have any answers for that? Like, what happened over the time that the fields got so horrible?
Fields used constantly. Unlike Comac and some surrounding districts, predominantly we have a high school, and most of our groups and teams use the high school, and we have no time to take them out for rest and rehabilitation. And we don't say no. Community groups want to use the fields, we say yes, schedule permits. Obviously our school teams use them as well. As I mentioned, we did start last year to close fields, which created a hardship for everyone, to try to rehabilitate, and that did work. But with the lack of space and the lack of fields and the demands, we're really not able to do that. And that's what's causing. We have irrigation at the high school. We have irrigation everywhere at the high school. We aerate the fields. We cannot use pesticides or any kind of fertilizers or turf builders and things of that
But what
nature.
does Comac or the other districts do to make their fields look beautiful?
In some school districts, and Comac is one of them, they have designated schools or land for just one sport. I know that in Burr, I think it's Burr Avenue School is just soccer only, is that correct? It's a soccer only facility where in Hauppauge, as you know, it's soccer, lacrosse, everything. And
It's
that's really an issue.
It's really, and I pay a lot of taxes, and so does everybody else. And every year, our taxes just go up anyway. So,
Hopefully this is the first step in improving all of the fields.
so maybe you guys should think about doing the whole turf on that side and start from there. With the whole, do it the right way the first time, and not half-ass, that way. Thank you.
Any further questions? Yes?
You want to go first? Hello, I'm Mrs. Mehta. I have 2 students in the Hauppauge committee, and some of them know me, hopefully. But I'm listening to all the parents, and I love the idea of turf and everything. But I had just a couple of questions. We have Mr. Scarito, who talks about the value of house because he knows the best. He's the best on Hauppauge. So the first thing when the parents look at the school district, that's the first thing they would look at, whether educationally Hauppauge school district is competitive and whether the taxes are low. That's the thing. I don't think they would go all the way at the back to look at the turf, but that's just my opinion. Second point I wanted to make is, yes, I am also very embarrassed being a Hauppauge student and a parent. The reason being, anywhere I take my kids, they are sitting at the back. Whether it be Science Olympiad, they're sitting at the back. Okay, because Hauppauge is the last. Oh, Hauppauge is not there to be visible. And this is happening from 10 years. 10 years, my students are always sitting at that same spot, in that same location. Whether it be any school competitions which are educational, or even if it is a soccer competition, or even a tennis competition. If you go in the tennis fields, you will see there are potholes. It rains and it gathers in the pothole, and the varsity and the JV teams are playing there. We are talking about 7th and 8th graders, which I think even for lacrosse and even for other fields are like one team, if I'm not mistaken. As well as for the high school, it's the JV and the varsity, which goes for even the tennis thing. Now, if you have parts while the varsity teams are playing, it's an embarrassment, absolute embarrassment, and I agree with the parent. So you should fix practically everything for the athletics. It's not just about one turf field, which I would love to have along with everything else. So that's just a consideration. Another thing when we talk about competitive edge, with potholes, they don't have any competitive edge. Hauppauge schools and students have no competitive edge. We need to fix this everywhere. And I think so when our kids, they're little. I used to be a soccer kid for my child when he was in kindergarten or first grade. I don't see them playing here ever. I used to have my practice somewhere in the Pines or any other school, not here. So who are playing here? They're the middle schoolers and the high schoolers, I think, and students coming from other school districts that are playing here. So having said that, what is the ROI we are looking at for our students? If we are looking at the high school students, we are talking about how many? 400 per year, per grade. So that is what? 1,200? 1,200 students. Out of that, has anybody made an analysis as to how many students are getting scholarship for lacrosse, soccer, and for can anybody tell me how many students are getting scholarship to go into colleges where they can advance? Because I don't see any pros sitting here in their after ages, as you guys over here who are pros of any team and are sitting on the board. You guys all have other qualifications that is bringing food on the table. So what is the ROI is the question we are looking for, and has anybody made that analysis as to how many students from our high school are getting scholarship for soccer, lacrosse, and for football? I think somebody should do that analysis, because that is called as return on investment. Being a financial analyst, I think I would like to know that, because that's where we are spending our money, where we can spend also in other places too. So that's another point I want to make. And this is a decision. We are teaching our kids fiscal responsibilities. They are going to go out there and they are going to need a job after they have finished their high school. What is the fiscal responsibility as the board you are looking at when you're looking at these numbers, whether you're creating more opportunities for your kids or you're creating more opportunities somewhere else, is something that as parents we have to make a fiscal decision. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments from the community? Yes.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline. I have 3 children. I have one in middle school right now. I have 2 kids, one in elementary school and one starting elementary school in September. And my son is definitely involved in sports. I mean, he's been on the football team. He's currently on the soccer team. I mean, he's definitely part of the sports. But as you had mentioned, I did look at the facilities report that's online, and I was reading through it. And there is, one thing sticks out to me every time I go to my children's school, the Forest Brook School. I'm always embarrassed by what the bathroom looks like and what my kids are using in the bathroom. I mean, my kids even come home from school and will complain about the bathroom. I'm not talking about how clean it is, I'm just talking about how outdated it is and all that. And even, like I said, when we go up to the school events all the time, it is really embarrassing. So I just want everybody to realize that I understand, obviously, like I said, we're involved in sports. I understand that you may see that as a need, but I see this more as a need of taking a look at what the buildings need so that more of the community, more of the children are benefiting from that. Just a couple of things, like I mentioned, the Forest Brook bathroom. And that is the only elementary school, by the way, that is listing a bathroom issue. I mean, I guess the other schools don't have that concern. So I really feel like Forest Brook, that should be something that should be considered. It looks like there's also an issue with the, ramps and stairs and safety in the high school that's also listed on the report. And I feel like those kinds of things are a safety issue, as well as the potholes in the parking lot at the middle school right now. They are going out there to take the buses, and the kids' safety and being able to get there safely rather than falling into a pothole, I think, is also an issue that should be addressed. I don't know if there's a way to kind of put it together with the fields. I'm not saying I'm totally against the fields. I just feel like as a parent that, maybe there are other parents out there that don't have all their kids involved in all the sports, but they should really be considered that there are other things that buildings need that would really benefit all of the students rather than just those, maybe kids that are participating in sports.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments from the community?
Hi, pardon my tardiness, so I didn't see the whole presentation. I'm just very concerned regarding, we're talking in one area is about being fiscally conservative, as we've done for many years. And I was part of the bond committee And as part of the bond committee, this was well thought out. It wasn't rushed through. And we did a lot of homework. This is being rushed through at this time, and I don't think it's the best idea. I'm not saying that I'm against the turf field, but I'm not saying that I'm for it either. But I think when we're talking about certain things such as having a contradictory message about dollars, if it's the superintendent's salary that you don't want to pay her, and that's something that we value, all of us, parents and students value what she has brought to the table. And when you're talking about spending money, we have to look at everything as a whole, including IB, sports, theater, etc. I think right now, by trying to push this through without having another forum at some time, rather than an ad hoc meeting, really needs to be done. I think we need to do our research as we did for the bond vote, and that's something that we should not rush and put it on the ballot today when no one knows about it. This week, it's Holy Week, it's Passover, etc. Honestly, I had an accountant appointment that I couldn't miss before tax season is going on, so I really don't think that that was the best situation or the timing of everything going on at the moment. I also think that we really need to change the tone, how things are going on as a whole. I want to take this time publicly also to indicate that I truly believe that there should be a revote for Mrs. Chris, that she adds value, as potentially this field could as well. But again, doing our homework, looking at everything, and bringing value. So please don't rush. We've built this community up in the last 40 years, slowly, methodical, conservative. As a banker, the way we've done things, we've never rushed. We've always done it very well. So I'm asking the board to really don't rush this. Let's look at it. Let's research it. Potentially, I don't know if James, have you even considered a potentially another bond regarding other important items that are going on within the community? I mean, within the buildings, the bathrooms in the middle school, the bathrooms in this building, just a whole bunch of other things that maybe were never really fulfilled in the various bonds and capital improvements that should have been done. So let's use our money wisely, conservatively, and again, I strongly vote that we keep Mrs. Chris, regardless of, I work for a boss that isn't the easiest to work with.
Your comments should be based upon the agenda tonight, Ms. Borowski. If you want to revisit the issue concerning Ms. Chris, I suggest you come to a meeting where the comments are open to any issue concerning the district rather than just the propositions. I do think that, let me just finish, please. I do think that that conversation can spiral out of control and we could be here all night.
I understand.
So, with all due respect, the agenda says comments should be limited to what we're talking about tonight, which is propositions. So I won't respond to your comments concerning Mrs. Chris's situation. I do ask that you bring them up in the proper forum.
I will do that. I will indicate that what I am looking at, and this is the proper form, is conservative spending and research spending. And that's the point that I was really making. So pardon me if I deviated, but it is kind of all part of the same package, and we have developed that, and I'm proud of the Hauppauge School District in that us doing that. So I would like us to continue on that path of being fiscally conservative and not make these dips and turns. So I appreciate
you were part of which bond committee?
I was part of the bond committee. That was the most recent bond, was about 7 years ago.
The one that failed or the one that passed?
Well, I was part of both the original one that failed, and then when it was revisited with the budget only and separating it out, I was part of both and promoted both and was involved in both. So,
just as a comparison, okay, in that former bond, we spent $4.1 million on the music rooms in the middle school. Do you think that benefits kids more or less than the fields?
I think they actually benefit equally, But all,
$4.1 million, there was no public outreach.
I think in all due respect, Mr. Barchet, it's not about the spending of the money. I think what it is pushing it through on the 9th hour. When we had the bond, it was very well researched, and this is 7 years, things have changed.
I'll get to you pushing it through at the 11th hour in a second. $4.4 million on the auditorium. 4.1 on the music room, 4.4 on the auditorium. We're talking about, with aid here, we're talking about less than $1 million. I do believe that will benefit many more kids in either of those projects, or just as many. However, as far as rushing it through, perhaps, with all due respect, you're misunderstanding what we're doing here tonight. We're not voting right now whether to install turf fields. The only thing we're doing is saying that the community can vote whether they want it or not. Do you have a problem with that, with letting the community say whether they want it or not?
Well, I think in all due respect, my feeling is I always make educated decisions as an educated consumer, and at this point, I don't think I have enough information to make that educated decision.
But you're speaking for the 3,000 people that vote. Are they all as uneducated as you about this?
No, what I'm indicating is that what is currently going on regarding how, I don't know if this was presented yet on the website yet. Has it been? Has there been a meeting that we've had for when we had the bond vote?
There'll be a budget hearing in the middle of April, as there is every year. This will be open to debate. There'll be a vote where the community, 3,000, 4,000 people that vote, and the 6 of us that showed up today, or the 5 of us that showed up today, will only count as 1 vote each. The decision will be made by everyone standing behind you.
And I
don't have a problem with letting them make that decision.
I don't either. I think it should be the community. I got that. I think what I'm just really indicating is that it really just needs to have more time. I don't know why this isn't presented next year. This is the first thing that came up now, and if this is something that was on the board's mind, in all due respect, it should have been brought up sooner.
It was in the facilities report that was released months and months ago.
And were there meetings months and months ago after that regarding this particular proposal?
There were the facilities committee met many, many times.
Okay, but I'm saying that was brought to the public, that we knew about the
That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing here today. That's what we'll do in April, and that's what people will make their own decisions in May, whether they want this or not.
So is it going on the ballot now, regardless of what the research is being done or how people are understanding it, is my question.
We haven't had a vote on that yet.
Okay.
My strong feeling is that we should let the community decide whether they want this or not, and I don't think it's for you or me to make that decision for them.
No, my question was, is tonight determining if it's going to be on the ballot regardless?
Pursuant to the law, tonight has to be the night. There's a time frame built in.
There is something called a 45-day rule.
Okay.
And there has to be a public notice of any proposition. The public notice for the budget vote, the annual budget vote, and elections was made long ago because we know what the date is.
Yes.
In our last discussion of the budget here, last week, it was mentioned that if there were other propositions to go up, we had to adhere to the 45-day public notice rule, which would be the 4th of April. So it's coming very quickly. That being said, I just want to respond to you and say that I understand what you're saying in that there was a comprehensive facilities committee report, very similar, not totally with membership, but similar to what you experienced with the previous bond. The turf fields are a project within a wide array, of other projects that were being recommended to be done.
Okay.
We did have a presentation of the entire report. The board has chosen to discuss the turf fields as a separate issue right now. And as I said at the beginning of my remarks, I really encourage us to move forward with the subcommittee of the board that was formed to look at all the other projects. And that could answer some of the other questions that were out here tonight as well. Because well, having served on a committee, the board is being handed this document. the board has the option to add additional items in the report. If they want to make our entire field turf, you know, theoretically, they could put that in. Or they could remove recommended items. So that's why I say it's important work for us to continue to move forward on the totality of what this district needs in terms of facilities. So hopefully we will be doing that and be able to then make another decision, because if the board chooses to make the turf decision tonight separately, that's a decision they're making. But as Mr. Barchet said, it does have to be approved by the public, which is why my recommendation is do not embed it in the budget. If we really want to know if the public supports the budget, it should be the budget. If we really want to know if the public supports turf fields, it should be the turf fields. And then the board has to make the next decision. How do we get the rest of the work done, if indeed they decide we need to get the work done? And that could lead us, potentially, to what Mr. Crawford was asking before, which is a bond to get some of that important work done.
And Paul, just to clarify one thing, you weren't here in the beginning, but we talked about fiscal responsibility. This will result in $0 in tax levy, zero.
Okay.
Money that we have, that if we don't use, it goes bye-bye.
Okay. And then also, as you're, let me understand this
It doesn't go
right.
bye-bye.
It goes into a fund.
Gotcha. Is it also going to be a separate vote? So there'll be the budget vote and then a separate vote?
The board has to make
That's
that decision.
what,
The board can make the decision to do nothing, to
Yes.
make it a separate vote, or to put it in the budget.
okay,
If we want to put it in the budget, I think we have another 3 weeks to do that, roughly.
okay.
But right now, because of the 45-day rule that Ms. Chris discussed, it had to happen tonight.
I understand. It's just, usually you like a little notice, but I understand.
How does Kennedy do?
You know what, honestly, I was at the account meeting, I don't even know yet, but hopefully she'll add a lot of value also to the district.
Thank you, and thank you for your words and your opinion.
Thank you.
Ms. Hodosky.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Barring the conversation or a detailed conversation on municipal cost accounting, the golden rule is always when you have an opportunity with a one-shot, you make sure you pair a one-shot expense with a one-shot revenue. You have a golden opportunity here. It doesn't happen often. I actually really agree with the concept of taking this opportunity where you've come to this one-shot revenue, not expected in our budget, and also encouraged to use a little bit of our fund balance to bring down the fund balance, to utilize it in a manner which supports all kids. I agree with you. We've done lots of projects for this district in our buildings through theater and lots of different places. Our fields need help. And I just normally would be more concerned about this. And I'm going to tell you that sometimes you have to make very quick decisions. You didn't expect that money to come. It's here. If you don't make that decision now, you probably won't be able to make it next year. So here is your opportunity to take your one-shot revenue and put it in a place where I think this community really could use it. So I would recommend you use option 3, that you have no tax increase based upon it. It's a separate proposition, standalone from the budget, but that you take this one-shot opportunity and consider it.
Thank you for your words, Ms. Hodosky. Hello.
Hi, Chris Hatchadorian. I have 2 children in the district, one in the middle school, one in Forest Brook, which, if I can just reiterate the thoughts, that there are some horrible issues at that school, but that's for another night. I came here tonight, very mixed feelings. I was not for these turf fields. I still have some issues, so to speak. Luckily, I knew that this was going on tonight, and I was able to come. I think the majority of people here are sports parents, and they're able to get the word out to other sports parents. I guess my concern is I feel that my ideas have changed because I've been here and I think the biggest game changer, I think, is the fact that we do have that money and that we can pay for this without raising taxes, which is everybody's concern. And, that's always on people's minds when they vote for these things. And I guess my question is, every year when the budget comes out, the public gets their pamphlet that explains the budget and it goes online and people can look at it. Are we looking to do something similar with this, where people who are not here this evening and who, let's be honest, if you are not a sports parent, you're going to have a lot of reasons speaking at this, as I was. And I have a son who's probably going to play football in the middle school next year. So I am, somebody who would benefit from this, so to speak. Harborfield's recently, a couple of years back, maybe last year before, voted it down by a huge margin. It was like 1,000 and something to 200. And I'm just wondering if that's something we can consider to share with the public, that this money will not raise our taxes. This money is money that we have. I just think that would really was something that changed my mind. Even though I still have reservations about other issues, I think a lot of parents behind me could agree with that. As sports parents, they're going to tell other sports people, and they're all going to get out to vote, and they're going to make sure they vote for it. But I think my concern is for the non-sports parents, the ones who are like, this doesn't benefit my kid, and I don't want to raise my taxes.
We do put out, I think Pat maybe you can expand on this a little bit. We do put out an information sheet, so to speak, and do publicize certain aspects of the budget, especially the propositions.
Yeah, and I think your point is well taken, but I have to say that I would hope that it doesn't come down to this group of people got this group of people got that, because the reality is the high school auditorium renovations, every child in the district
I agree with you. I agree, but I guess my concern is that that's sometimes what it comes down to.
I know, I clearly hear what you're saying. I understand that. And so I think that it comes down in the notification and how we notify the public, and how clear we are about some of the points that you just made in terms of funding source and how it can be funded. And I think that, from my perspective, the auditorium benefits all, the music suite at the middle school benefits all, and the turf field really benefits all as well, because it will be used by practically every child in the district, whether in youth sports or the middle school, high school athletics. So I think that's the point, and my point in saying what I said is, I would not want this to be an issue that divides the community. It
I
shouldn't
agree.
divide the community.
I guess
It
my
should be-
point is just not that I suggest that the board or yourself puts out a why we should do this, but more just like the budget. These are the facts as they are.
Correct.
For those of you who were not at this meeting, who did not know what was going on, these are the facts. Please make an educated decision based on the facts. I think that's all I really was trying to get across.
Your point's well taken. I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments from the community? Any questions or comments from the board concerning anything?
Excuse me, I'm sorry, I have one question.
Mr. Hodosky.
Hello, I just have one question. So the fields are going to last, what, 10 years? 10 or 11 years? Would that be fair to say?
That's the warranty, yes.
The warranty. So the cost is a one-shot deal that we're looking to invest. What is the cost that you've seen for fields being replaced?
That is a great question. The manufacturers say 2/3 the original replacement cost, but the two that I've replaced, it's less than that. I've seen them slightly under 50%. Now, not all of that cost, for example, if we did the North Field, for example, not all of that cost is the field. It would be the netting and the fencing and the sidewalks. You wouldn't have to replace that. So let's say about $400,000 or $450,000 to replace the North Field, maybe a little bit more for the stadium field.
So, what, $1 million?
For the two?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we have $1 million set aside in 10 years for replacement? Would we? Are we going to plan
Great
for that?
idea to start
Another reserve fund?
Start a reserve fund, absolutely.
I mean, I'd be okay with that, because I think that's important to do, because we don't want to come across in 10 years with $1 million. But
Not on the Bay ballot.
There you go.
I think that's a very good point, and something that we should obviously consider.
Thank you.
Remind us after May. Yes.
I'm sorry. I sat
your
down.
second- your
I
second
sat
item.
down and realized I forgot to ask. On that report, there was something in there on a couple of different schools that said they need to change non-rated doors. Is that a safety thing? Like, what does that mean? I just got concerned. It says non-rated interior doors need to be changed.
Those are the interior door replacements?
Those are interior doors. If you do replace something, once you touch it one for one, you have to bring it up to the new code. So we're not required to replace anything, but we were talking about replacing interior doors throughout the building. So we just made the reference of what's an interior fire-rated door or what would be a non-fire-rated door.
So if it's non-rated, that means it's out of code?
No, it's not fire rated. It means it's not required to be fire rated. So if there's a space, for example, these doors, if we replace them, they have to be a 90-minute rating. They have to withstand the fire for 90 minutes. If it's a C-label door, it's 45 minutes, and if it's a collection door, it's 20 minutes. But we're not required to bring those up to code. But if we do touch them, we want to bring them up to
So
code.
what it comes down to is when a school is built, it's built according to code. 10, 15, 20 years down the line, the code changes. And we want to make a repair on something, we can't use the code when it was built. We've got to bring it up to the new code.
It sounds like a safe, like it probably would be.
It's not that it's a safety, it's like any older building, any older home that you might own. It's just that as a municipality and a school, we have to stay up to date with the codes anytime we touch a building.
Okay.
And in the last 12 years, the code's changed 3 times. So
Okay.
they're constantly, I mean, by the time you finish something, there's a new code that's been brought in.
Okay.
So if we do touch it, we need to bring it up, but we're not required to start ripping things down just to bring them up to the new code.
Okay, yeah, because it was almost like every building, it said
Correct.
non-rated interior doors. Okay.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments from the community? Ms. Casey?
I might have missed this in the beginning, and I'm just curious, but I see these kids at the high school all the time, and they all look like they're having so much fun with the soccer and lacrosse, and they're playing in that whole north field, and there must be, at least where that new turf field is, probably 8 teams playing at any given time, the way it's divided up. So they're going to lose all that space. Is there a reason that field has to go there instead of at the middle school? Like, why couldn't we put that field up on the middle school where the track is and the stadium is already, so that the middle school kids could benefit from that field? You'd have a field at the high school, and then all those kids could still practice in that space on the north side and in the back. I'm just curious, I'm just saying, because you already had sort of stadium seating and a track in the middle school, and that way both schools benefit, and you don't lose all that space in the north part there. Because there's a lot of kids that practice. I mean, those kids are there from 2 o'clock in the afternoon till 8 o'clock at night sometimes. And they're not going to be able to practice anymore. I mean, that's a lot of kids that aren't going to be able to use that space. So if you move it up to the other place, you sort of already have
I don't
a
know
spot.
if the facilities committee looked at the middle school as an option. So maybe you
I
can
was
respond.
just curious.
I think the main reason with that is inside there, it's so small, you couldn't feel a full-size JV or varsity field. At the middle school, I mean, usually at a middle school, it's, if I got it this long, that's where the lines are gonna go.
That used to be the high school field. Like when I went to high school here, that's where the high school
But if we
football.
wanted to build a full-size varsity soccer field, for example, at least we would have to take that track out of it. I mean, you want a larger, you're not gonna fit a full-size field in there. I mean, the dimensions are kind of limited, but at least at the high school, it's a 400-meter track, so inside a 400-meter track, you can fit a full-size lacrosse or a soccer field.
Oh, no, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the other one.
Well, you're talking about the middle school.
No, I'm talking about that field in the front. I'm not
That's
talking
all
about.
high school. You said the middle school, so I'm across the street at the middle school.
I'm saying move that little practice field over to the middle school.
That's 360 feet long by 210, I mean, it's a varsity-sized field. It wouldn't fit within the footprint of the middle school. If you're talking about up on where the little track is up there, it wouldn't fit within that
So that's
footprint.
bigger than a football field?
Which is this? Yeah. Football is actually the smallest of all the sports.
That's just, it just seems like a shame. That's a lot of space to lose for all those kids. I mean, there's a lot of kids that use that space. That was my only.
I think they can still use it, though. I don't know that anything's going to foreclose the kids that are enjoying it now to enjoy this one. Any further questions or comments from the community? Any further questions or comments from the board or administration based upon the community's comments? Mr. Scrito?
I just had 3 questions.
3?
I'm sorry.
No, is that what you said, 3?
Yes. The community brought up a couple. Is there a reason we can't move that field and save money by pushing it up? We already have a fence line there. In other words, Mr. Grillo, to the east of that field, sir, there's a fence. So as the homeowner, Coach Messina pointed out, is there a reason, he's going to hate me for this because it's behind the tennis courts, but over where the tennis courts are, sir?
We originally looked at that when we did the facilities. It's a little too small.
Okay, because you already have the
So,
line.
it could go either one of these locations, but once you got all the way south of the tennis courts, or north of the tennis courts, it's not big enough. It's a little smaller. Plus, it's a change in elevation there.
And then the other question was, when was that photo taken, sir?
It came off of Google, so I'm just thinking it's probably 2 years old, maybe.
The only reason I'm bringing that up, if you look at it, we see how little grass we really do have. Just saying, I mean, it doesn't look too pretty.
Yeah.
It was a non-snowy winter day.
I know, I understand. And then the last thing that one of our community members brought up, which is a great question. In 10 years from now, when we have to possibly replace the field, can you still do the thing where you package it with something that's eatable and bring that cost down? You cannot. Okay.
Any project, no matter what we do, has to last a minimum of 15 years. So if we have a door that falls off the hinges or a roof that leaks, if it doesn't last 15 years, that's the life on reconstruction in terms of the state education department. And if we were building a new building, it has to last 20 years, and all the contents inside that.
So if the fields last 15 years, it would be able?
If the fields last 15 years, when we go to replace it, it would be able, yes.
Thank you. Let's take care of it. Any further questions or comments from the board or community? Yes.
I've heard of recycling the stadiums or donating the turf fields after. Is that something you've ever experienced?
Field Turf is actually looking into now taking the grass and the carpet per se and recycling and using that as part of the infill.
Is that something we could save money on?
Brand new, so maybe in 10 or 12 years it'll be the new hot thing. But right now they're literally just starting to look into that.
Thank you. Anything further from anyone? Would anyone like to make a motion? Mr. Scarito?
I would like to make a motion. I like option 3. I trust in the public. And the public that's not here tonight that was discussed, they can do their due diligence and, read all about it and stuff like that. But I think it's been a long time coming that we need fields. Having 3 kids have gone through it, and we need to fix them. Obviously, there's other things we need to fix as well, but I think the fields need to.
Okay, but when we talk about the fields, I mean, there's two fields here. So we have to make a decision whether to address both, whether to address one now and one later.
Thank you. Mrs. Chris, would you rather do 1 now or 2, or what is your opinion, please?
I honestly have to tell you, although I'd love to do them both now, I really, in terms of being fiscally responsible and not really knowing what our fund balance is going to be, I think that we, as an administration, were much more comfortable recommending the stadium, that we get the stadium done for $1.7 million. It doesn't prohibit us from coming back if we find out we have additional fund balance and, going back to the public and asking for approval or embedding it in the budget. I know there's a lot of work to be done. Believe me, our grounds people will be thrilled to have something like this to maintain, where you can literally plow the snow right off it. But I just think it's the more prudent way to go right now until we know really how much fund balance we have and really what's going to happen with state aid.
So once we get that information, the options would be whether to include it in the budget, whether to fund it some other way.
Or to wait one more year. Or to include it in a bond.
Yep.
Or to put it up, if we put up a bond alongside the bond as a standalone, there are a lot of different options then.
Yes.
Is there a discount if you do 2 at once?
I mean, I can't speak for a contractor.
John will save on his fee.
Absolutely. But more important, obviously, with anything, I mean, if we did more roof, the larger the project, the lower the cost is going to be. So if you told a contractor you're going to do 2 fields as opposed to 1, I'm sure his numbers are going to go down a little bit. He's buying more product, sure.
So
I mean, I don't want to discount it and say, discount it 5% or 10%.